society, then a logical question is, did this knowledge power nexus exist before modernity within Europe, and also did other societies, whether it is in Latin America, in the Middle East, or in Southeast Asia, did other societies also have the same kind of knowledge power nexus that Foucault talks about? And that is where Halak's intervention becomes important, because unlike Foucault, who is indebted to, so what he does, he goes into pre-modern, he goes into the history of pre-modern social formation of Islamic tradition. He studies the Ottoman Empire, he studies Indonesia, Malaysia, partly also India, but not at greater length. And there he says that in Islamic tradition, there is a different trajectory of knowledge power matrix, which is different from the way Foucault or the operation of knowledge power has been there in the Western tradition. Now, what is that difference? This difference is this, that in the Islamic tradition, ulama, and by the way, today when we speak about the term ulama, under Orientalist influence, okay, if you have long beard, it has become a negative term. No, ulama is not simply those who have degrees from Madaris. If you read Maududi, who would describe Aflatun and Arastu as ulama Yunan. Even Newton is described as alim. Okay, but in contemporary times, when we speak about ulama, the word itself has been orientalized in such a way that it only is left with, it is bestowed with only negative connotation. Okay, so what he says that under the Islamic pre-modern Islamic tradition, ulama as agents of knowledge, they enjoyed considerable autonomy from the power that be. And so you might say that, well, okay, this is just a statement, but show us how. Now, the mechanism of this is that unlike the modern state, okay, the pre-modern Muslim social formation, the modern state is intrusive. It wants to regulate each and every domain of life, including the domain of sexuality. Now you have age fixed for marriage, to the extent now that, the state is present even in your bedroom. But the pre-modern state in the Muslim tradition, it allowed considerable autonomy to ulama. Okay? And it was accompanied by the existence of a wide variety of organization in the civil society. Sufi lodges, soup kitchens, caravanserais, libraries. Okay? So these were the institutions where ulama, they were engaged in the production and the dissemination of knowledge, but they were not subservient to the power. Okay? So I think this is important. What Halak does, from there he coins, I think coin is probably not the correct word, but he builds a case for the existence of what he calls Israeli Orientalism. That if we want to understand contemporary Middle East, okay, Israel as a state which has come into being in the late 1940s, its existence, its continuation is bound up with the Orientalist knowledge. And unlike Halak, this knowledge is not simply, unlike Edward Said, this knowledge is not simply simply there in textbook or novels, but he also talks about the Israeli military's involvement in educational institution, what you can teach. Even, as you know, there are segregated forms of education in Israel. So what he says, that Israeli Orientalism is an extension of Western Orientalism. Okay, the dehumanization and the stigmatization of Palestinians and what we all are witness to, most of us probably as helpless beings, what is unfolding in Gaza is, intellectually speaking, a manifestation of that Israeli Orientalism, because before you actually dehumanize and kill the people, there is already a conceptual ground prepared by Israeli Orientalism through media, through conversation, through textbook, as terrorist and what have you. Now from there, I ask that if there is a case of Israeli Orientalism, and if we want to understand the world's largest democracy, okay, then is there something similar? By the way, now we are told that Greece is not the birthplace of democracy. It is apparently the part of Bihar that I come from, Vaishali and so on. And this was like, thousands of years ago. So do we have a similar kind of knowledge power matrix here? And Halak is silent actually in the book. He keeps talking about, without giving any evidence, that China and India are examples of resistance to Western Orientalism, okay, but without saying how or giving any evidence. I think it is quite the contrary. If you see what is happening with the Uyghur in China, it is not something which is resistance to Orientalism. Actually, China is redeploying the Western Orientalism to describe these Uyghur population within its own territory exactly in more or less the same language. Okay, so my point here is that Halak's thesis about Orientalism, his critique of Said is fine, and also his case of Israeli Orientalism is good, but he never extends his comparative inquiry. So remember, Foucault did not study the pre-modern social formation or societies outside of Europe, which Halak does. But then a logical question would be, what was the knowledge power dynamics in pre-modern India? And that is where Sheldon Pollock comes. By the way, Sheldon Pollock and Wael Halak, they teach in the same university. Okay? So it would be almost impossible to imagine that Wael Halak did not know about Sheldon Pollock's writing. So it is probably choice not to discuss him. So Sheldon Pollock, he wrote this wonderful essay, and actually it was so powerful that actually Sheldon Pollock was a lot of writers, especially in Germany, they sort of attacked him because he showed he showed that the knowledge about India or especially, okay, let's leave that. This particular intervention by Sheldon Pollock, he says that in pre-modern India, you already have a deep operation of knowledge power dynamics in a way that it strengthens the domination of the Savarna or the Brahminical caste by denying literacy and equality to the lower caste people. So here, in the pre-modern Hindu social formation, knowledge is at the service of domination. So he calls it even pre-form of racism. Okay, he calls it indigenous Orientalism. Okay, now I use the term Hindu Orientalism, and we can have a discussion about it, and that is what actually I would be more interested to hear from you, whether we should call it Hindu Orientalism, Indian Orientalism, Brahmanism, there can be many other words. But what I want to say is this. The words can be revised, but the point here is the identification of a particularly dominant form of practice, okay, which has existed from 17th century onwards until now. Now, Pollock does talk about it, but unlike Pollock, I extend it to modern India, and also I'm interested in democracy, in the question of nationalism and international relation, which Pollock doesn't talk about. So he says that in the pre-modern Hindu social formation, you have monopolization of knowledge and literacy by twice born, which if you study Hindu caste system, it is known as Dvija, those who are twice born, those who wear the sacred thread, okay? And it is also rationalized by biogenetics, notion of purity and pollution, including the religious text, okay? And the axis of polarity and contrast. So remember, this was the key mechanism of Orientalism, right? But in the pre-modern Hindu social formation, the axis of this othering was the Aryan versus non-Aryan, or Malecha. Tribals were called as Asuras, right? So what you have here is that in pre-modern Hindu social formation, there is already a practice in which knowledge is monopolized by few, and a vast section of the society is denied that knowledge, and therefore also even the theoretical possibility of equality. Now, since Halak doesn't take this comparative route, therefore I think there is some problem, okay? And if we really, because as some of you might know, it is not simply the case that anthropology is a comparative discipline, but I think in our social and cultural lives, we constantly do comparison. Some of you who might have come from a village close by, which is like 200 kilometers away from there, and if you come to Aligarh, and then you say that, well, there things happen differently. People do things quite differently here. So there is always a comparison, right? My uncle used to pronounce this word this way, but my nephew does it very differently. So comparison is a very useful thing, and therefore I think the inclusion of Sheldon Pollock's intervention is important to understand this dynamic of Hindu Orientalism. Now, Hindu Orientalism, as I will come to the empirical demonstration of my thesis. So you see, what is the meaning of Akhand Bharat, by the way? No, so it is a territorial thing. No, of course there is, but the key thing is, it is undivided India emptied of Malechas and outsiders. Okay? It is undivided India because the idea is that, there has been an India which has been continuous and so on and so forth, and then you have invasions and outsiders who came and polluted it. So the undivided India is not simply restoring that alleged territorial unity, but also purifying of the contamination, the bad influences which has come from outside. So when you hear the calls. I mean, Muslims, they don't want to leave it, but you have people like Giriraj Singh, and who would say that, why don't you go there? You should go there. So that is an attempt of purification, because, and that is what the ultimate idea of undivided India is. It is not simply undivided India is restoration of an imagined India, but also it must be emptied or purified of the so-called influences or the bad things which have come from outside. Okay, and therefore it is also a supranational ideology, in the sense that not India as a nation state after 47, but also it goes much beyond, right? You already probably know, I mean, this is mostly in the form of jokes, but as you know, every joke has some truth. So many of my friends who were on the Hindu right in JNU, they would tell you that, oh, California, actually in the long distant past it was Kali Purnia. Okay, and the fact that, and you also know, so this is a way of appropriation, right? And this appropriation also works in the Muslim tradition, like, you know, William Shakespeare became quite a famous person, and then you might have some Muslims who say that, well, actually he was our own figure, and it was stolen by the Western tradition. He was actually Wali Muhammad Shaikh Pir, turned into William Shakespeare. And then from the Hindu side, you have like, you see, who is Jean-Paul Sartre? He was actually Jaipal Shastri, right? And then the French. So the point is, California as California, right? So there is this imagination which goes beyond the nation state, okay, and that we have to take into consideration, okay. Now, so now let me empirically demonstrate it. So I think the first instance of Orientalism, and which informs our burning present right now, okay, this you will find after the Battle of Plassey, when Siraj-ud-Dawla is defeated. There is a British soldier and a scribe called William Watts, okay. He participated in that war, and then he wrote, and you will see that what this quote, and so we are talking about just after the Battle of Plassey. You see, they were also, British were using words like Moors to describe Muslims, okay. Now I think there is no need to probably for me to read it from beginning to the end. What I want to say here is the crux, that William Watts describes Hindus as natives and Muslims as outsiders, okay. And Muslims are not simply outsider, they are also rapacious, which is like oriented towards violence, okay. Hindus are timid, okay, they are predisposed towards spirituality and peace, whereas Muslims are not, because there is something innate about violence and so on and so forth. Now, this is what was said after Battle of Plassey. You will find more or less the crux is the same. The same kind of language is at play in contemporary India. Okay? Now, the key question is, why did William Watts do this? Okay? And this is something very important for all of us to remind. He did this precisely because the British, in order to establish their rule, they wanted to say that, look, we are not the first outsiders who came to rule India. Mughals were also outsiders. Okay? And it is from there that you will see Raja Ram Mohan Rai also deploying the same language. Okay? The British not simply described Muslims as outsiders. You know, Raja Ram Mohan Rai would say, I mean, by the way, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who is known as the father of Indian Renaissance, he welcomed the British colonial rule. He not simply welcomed it, he said that it has been a divine intervention. Okay? Now, if you really want to use the word called anti-national in its democratic sense, then Ram Mohan Rai would qualify as anti-national because you are legitimizing the colonial rule. So he was legitimizing colonial rule, describing Muslims as outsiders and calling Hindus as natives. Okay? Now, if you have that kind of formulation right from the time of so-called Indian Renaissance, right, it would, what is happening is historical is logical. It is not a departure from there, it is simply an extension, probably maybe intense extension, but it is not a departure from there. Okay? Now, many of you may have heard, and this is actually part of Indian historiography, we talk about divide and rule, right? And this is the policy that British, that is true, but I think Mahmood Mamdani made a powerful intervention where he says that what we are confronted with is not simply the question of divide and rule, but define and rule. Because first you have to define someone, you know, once I define you as a terrorist, once I define you as a traitor, right? And that becomes the blueprint for the governance. I mean, that is the new term. You know, 20 years ago, people did not use the word governance, right? This is a new vulgate. So this is the tool of domination. So you define. So it is not simply divide and rule, because divide and rule is not possible unless you are already engaged in the work of definition, right? So this was the chief reason why this depiction of Islam and Muslims happened. So my point is not that the Prime Minister in 2014 did not have any agency of his own when he said that there has been 1200 years of Gulami. He may have it, but it would not have been simply possible without this historical background that I have given to you. Then that historical formation, that historical knowledge formation, turn it into some kind of common sense. If you talk to many people, Hindus, they think that actually this is now after what has happened on 22nd of January. You have people. There was a guy who was my junior in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Now he's an IAS officer. He makes a Facebook post and saying that there is a liberation after 500 years, right? So this has been turned into a common sense, okay? And it is there, you know, some of you who might be interested in history, R.C. Majumdar's book is a great example of that kind of historiography. In sociology, you have Govind Sadashiv Ghurye, Nirmal Kumar Bose, Shamacharan Dubey, and my own teacher at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Yogendra Singh. But they do not do it in an identical way. Of course, there are differences, okay? But the differences, it is such a difference that makes no difference. You follow? This is a difference that doesn't make a substantive difference. So my point is that all these figures in history or sociology or anthropology or in political science. The so-called father of Indian political science is Rajni Kothari. You read him, he has the same thing as William Watts, okay, as Raja Ram Mohan Rai, but now he is Bap of Indian political science. Until we get another or probably a new father of Indian. Now that is, so you remember William Watts, he describes Hindus as native and original inhabitants, which is there among and in the writings of Raja Ram Mohan Rai as well. Now that is where I want to bring this issue of Adivasi. Okay. Now you remember I also mentioned that words are like loaded pistols through. Now in the BJP RSS language, they don't use the word called Adivasi. They use the term Vanvasi. Why?
That's why he is leaving that area. So from that way he is including that maybe.
So you see, Adi is timeless. It is a temporal concept. One is a space-oriented concept. So of course, now that history is being sought to be changed, that there is no that the Brahmins did not come from outside. Okay, they have been natives here. But of course, this is until now it has been the case that there is Aryan invasion. Or if you read Ambedkar or Ramaswamy Naikar, they are very emphatic about the fact that this Brahmanism and Hinduism came from outside. This was brought from Central Asia to the extent that Neeraj Chaudhary. Do you remember this guy? Neeraj Chaudhary is the one who wrote a book which is called an autobiography of an unknown Indian, and he dedicated that book to the memory of the British Empire. Okay, so he was one of those Anglophiles. Neeraj Chaudhary, he said that his original home as a Hindu is not India, it is in Central Russia, because that is where the Aryans came or the Brahmins came. Okay. Now, so the Adivasi is a temporal thing that no, these are people who have been there since time immemorial. When you say Vanvasi, then you want to get rid of the antiquity of that social category and say that they are simply forest dwellers. Actually, in some parts of Bihar, Adivasis are known as Pahadiya. Okay. They live in Pahar. Now this is needed, okay. So the deployment of the Vanvasi category is to say that look, these are not Aboriginal people, okay, but also to tone down the fact that the Brahmins or these Aryans, there is something called Aryavarth also, right? That we did not come from outside. Okay, and these people are not indigenous. They are simply like, okay, somewhere in the forest. But what is important in census, so Adivasis now officially they are described as Hindus. Okay, there is a famous case of an American anthropologist who wanted to study the tribes. She went all the way to Bihar and she met some anthropologists who were Hindus in Patna, and she asked them, they're like, what is the religion of these Pahadiya? And the local scholars, they said that, well, they are Hindus. And she said that, look, to the extent that I know the customs and tradition of these people, there is no resemblance between what is Hinduism and what they practice. And then these local people say that, well, since they are neither Christian nor Muslim, then they must be Hindus. Okay? So what you see, this Hindu Orientalism is an assimilative exercise which assimilates these people, and this was done officially because, you know, in the census, if you see on the left side, their religion was described as primitive tribal in 1951, and it becomes Hindu. Okay, M.N. Srinivas, who is considered another famous sociologist, he said that, okay, this anomaly has been now gotten rid of, because now this is the right move. G.S. Gurye, who was the so-called father of Indian sociology or anthropology, he even wrote a book called The Aborigines So-Called. It is there in the title itself. Okay, so they are not aboriginals, they are so-called. Okay, and it is from there that once you say that since they are neither Christian or nor Muslim, so they must be Hindus, but then they are not like any other Hindus.